Korean Mafia boss witnessed the courage of the Black Maid and kissed her in front of everyone. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a like if you love stories of forbidden love and unexpected courage, and let me know in the comments, what state or country are you watching from today? I love seeing how far this community reaches across the globe. Now, let's begin. Seoul, South Korea, a metropolis of dazzling contrasts, where ancient temples stood in the shadows of towering glass skyscrapers, where tradition and modernity collided on every corner, and where, in the darkest recesses of its glittering facade, one name commanded absolute terror and respect: Kang Ji-hoon. At 34 years old, Ji-hoon had achieved what most men only dreamed of, and what decent men feared to contemplate. He was the undisputed leader of the Hanjin Syndicate, an organization that had controlled Seoul's underworld for 3 generations. His grandfather had built it from nothing during the chaos following the war. His father had expanded it with ruthless precision, and Ji-hoon had transformed it into an empire that touched every shadow in the city. They called him the Spectre of Gangnam, a name earned through years of calculated brutality. When Kang Ji-hoon decided someone needed to disappear, they simply ceased to exist. No traces, no evidence, no whispered rumors, just silence where a person used to be. His rise to power had been written in blood and sealed with betrayal. He had learned early that in his world, trust was a currency that always depreciated, and love was a weakness that enemies exploited without mercy. These lessons had been carved into his psyche by his father's cruelty, and cemented by the faces of everyone who had ever underestimated him. But power, Ji-hoon had discovered, was a lonely throne. His penthouse occupied the top floor of the Hangang Tower, one of Seoul's most exclusive addresses. 65 stories above the chaos of the streets, Ji-hoon lived in pristine isolation. The space was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city he controlled, furniture that was minimal but impossibly expensive, air that seemed purified of anything common or ordinary. Everything in his life was calculated, controlled, precise. Everything except her. Amara Johnson arrived at the Hangang Tower on a gray Thursday morning in late autumn, when the last stubborn leaves clung to the trees like survivors refusing to surrender. She was 27 years old, a Black American woman with warm brown skin and eyes that held both exhaustion and determination in equal measure. Her clothes were simple but immaculately clean, and she carried a worn folder containing her employment documents. The employment agency had been skeptical when she applied. A Black woman seeking domestic work in one of Seoul's most exclusive addresses? The coordinator had raised an eyebrow, had warned her about the challenges she might face, had suggested perhaps she might be more comfortable in a different placement. But Amara couldn't afford to be comfortable. She couldn't afford to care about raised eyebrows or subtle prejudices. What she carried in her heart, the secret that drove her forward despite every obstacle, was worth any challenge, any discomfort, any risk. She had come to Seoul 3 years ago, following the man she thought she loved, only to discover that love could be a trap as much as a salvation. When that relationship had crumbled, leaving her stranded in a foreign country with nothing but her dignity and her determination, she had done what she always did. She survived. The private elevator rose in smooth silence, each floor ticking past like a countdown to her new reality. When the doors finally opened directly into the penthouse, Amara stepped into a world that seemed to exist in a different dimension from anything she had ever known. The space was breathtaking and cold in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the sprawling cityscape, a god's-eye view of millions of lives reduced to distant movements. The furniture was sparse but clearly expensive, all clean lines and muted colors that spoke of wealth through restraint rather than ostentation. The air itself seemed different here, filtered and purified, carrying the faint scent of something expensive and masculine. A man materialized from a side corridor, his approach so silent that Amara startled despite herself. He was perhaps 55, with silver-streaked hair, and a face that seemed incapable of expressing warmth. His black suit was immaculate, his posture military straight, his eyes assessing her with an efficiency that made her feel like a specimen under glass. "You are the new housekeeper," he said in English, his accent precise but noticeable. Amara straightened her spine, refusing to shrink under his scrutiny. "Yes, sir, Amara Johnson. The agency sent my documents ahead." Secretary Yoon's gaze swept over her, and she could see him cataloging everything. Her dark skin, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, the American English that marked her as foreign in more ways than one. Whatever he was thinking, his expression revealed nothing. "I am Secretary Yoon," I manage all aspects of Mr. Kang's household affairs. You will report directly to me, and through me, to Mr. Kang himself. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. He produced a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive document. Before we proceed, you must understand the rules of this household. These are not guidelines or suggestions. They are absolute laws, and violation of any of them will result in immediate termination. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Secretary Yoon began to recite. Rule 1. You will not speak to Mr. Kang unless he initiates conversation. Rule 2. You will not enter his private study under any circumstances. The door will be locked, but even if it were open, you are forbidden from crossing that threshold. Rule 3. You will not ask questions about Mr. Kang's business, his visitors, his schedule, or anything you might observe in this residence. Rule 4. You will not receive personal visitors during your employment. Rule 5. Personal phone use is prohibited during working hours. Rule 6. You will not discuss your employment with anyone outside this household. Rule 7. I understand, Amara said quietly but firmly. Secretary Yoon's eyebrow rose fractionally. I wasn't finished. Forgive me, sir, but I understand the nature of what you're explaining. Privacy, discretion, absolute professionalism. I'm here to work. Nothing more and nothing less. Whatever rules exist, I will follow them without exception. For a long moment, Secretary Yoon simply studied her. The previous applicants had cowered under his recitation of rules, their eyes darting nervously, their hands wringing with anxiety. This one met his gaze with something that looked almost like quiet defiance wrapped in professional courtesy. Very well, he said finally. Follow me. The tour of the penthouse took nearly 45 minutes. The kitchen was a chef's dream, equipped with technology Amara had only seen in magazines. The living areas were vast and spotless, decorated with art that probably cost more than everything she owned combined. Guest bedrooms lined one corridor, each one pristine and clearly never used. And at the end of a long hallway, she saw it, a heavy wooden door with brass fittings, distinctly different from every other door in the residence. Even closed, it seemed to radiate an aura of forbidden territory. The study, Secretary Yoon said, his voice dropping slightly. You do not clean it. You do not dust near it. You do not approach it under any circumstances. If you see Mr. Kang entering or exiting, you will avert your eyes and continue with your duties. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Your quarters are in the service wing near the kitchen. Your shift begins at 5:30 in the morning and ends at 9 in the evening. Sundays are your day off. Your first month is probationary. He paused, studying her one final time. Any questions? Amara had 100 questions, but she asked none of them. No, sir. I'm ready to begin. Then begin. And with those two words, Amara Johnson's new life started. For the first 3 weeks, Amara might as well have been working in a beautifully furnished ghost story. She rose each morning at 5, prepared breakfast for a man who never seemed to eat it, cleaned rooms that rarely seemed used, and maintained a household that felt more like a museum than a home. The only evidence that her employer actually existed came in fragments. A coffee cup left in the sink, a newspaper folded precisely on the dining table, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in certain rooms like the memory of a presence. Kang Ji-hoon was a phantom in his own residence. He left before dawn and returned well past midnight, moving through the penthouse like a shadow passing through shadows. On the rare occasions when their schedules overlapped, he passed through rooms without acknowledgement, as if she were simply another piece of furniture, functional, necessary, and utterly invisible. She learned his preferences through observation and Secretary Yoon's terse instructions. Mr. Kang preferred traditional Korean breakfast when he ate at home, simple dishes prepared with precision and fresh ingredients. He liked his coffee black, brewed strong, maintained at exactly the right temperature. He wanted fresh flowers in the main living area, but nothing with an overpowering scent. He required specific brands of toiletries, specific arrangements of his closet, specific patterns in the rotation of his extensive wardrobe. Amara memorized everything, performed her duties with mechanical efficiency, and counted the days until her first paycheck. But what kept her going, what gave her the strength to wake each morning in this cold, beautiful prison, was what waited for her on Sundays. She had a secret, a purpose that drove her through every exhausting day and every lonely night, and she guarded it with the ferocity of someone who knew that losing it would mean losing everything. What Amara didn't know, couldn't know, was that she wasn't nearly as invisible as she believed. Kang Ji-hoon had noticed her from the very first moment. His penthouse was equipped with a comprehensive security system that fed directly to his personal devices, cameras in every room except the bathrooms and her private quarters, motion sensors, audio monitoring in the common areas. It was a precaution born of necessity. In his world, assassins could wear any face, and betrayal could come from any direction. He had watched her enter his home that first morning, had observed the way she stood straight despite Secretary Yoon's obvious skepticism, had noted the determination in her eyes even as she faced an environment that was clearly designed to intimidate. He had seen the way she refused to shrink, refused to apologize for her presence, refused to be diminished. He had expected another forgettable employee. In his experience, housekeepers fell into two categories: the terrified ones who fled within weeks, and the calculating ones who hoped to leverage their position for information or access. Neither type lasted long, and neither type interested him. But this one was different. It wasn't just that she was foreign, though that set her apart immediately. It wasn't just that she was black, though he could see how that affected every interaction she had in a country that was often hostile to difference. It was something else. Something in her eyes that he recognized because he had spent his life reading people the way scholars read texts. Behind the exhaustion, behind the careful professionalism, there burned a quiet fire. Not ambition, not greed, not fear. Something else. Something that looked like determination, like purpose, like a secret that was worth protecting at any cost. What was a woman with eyes like that doing in a place like this? Ji-hoon found himself watching her more closely than he had watched any employee before. Through the security cameras, he observed her routines, her habits, the small rituals she probably didn't even realize she performed, the way she touched a small pendant hidden beneath her uniform before beginning each day's work, the way she paused sometimes at windows, looking out at the city with an expression that seemed to hold both sorrow and hope, the way she moved through his home with a quiet dignity that felt completely foreign to its cold spaces. She was hiding something. He was certain of it, and Kang Ji-hoon hadn't survived this long by letting mysteries remain unsolved. "The new housekeeper," he said one evening to Secretary Yoon, not looking up from the documents spread across his desk. "What do you know about her?" Secretary Yoon consulted his tablet with practiced efficiency. "Amara Johnson, 27 years old. American citizen, originally from Atlanta, Georgia. She came to South Korea 3 years ago on a tourist visa, later obtained a work permit. No criminal record, no known affiliations with any organizations of concern. She worked at several restaurants before the agency placed her. Her references were satisfactory, if limited." "Why did she come to Korea?" "The file indicates she followed a romantic partner, a Korean-American man who was returning to Seoul for business. That relationship apparently ended approximately 2 years ago. And she stayed?" "Yes, sir." Despite the challenges a black American woman would face finding stable employment here, Ji-hoon frowned slightly. "Family?" "According to her file, both parents are deceased. She has no siblings." She listed no emergency contacts. No emergency contacts. No family. No connections. On paper, Amara Johnson was exactly what she appeared to be, a lonely young woman trying to survive in a country that had never quite welcomed her. But Ji-hoon hadn't survived this long by trusting paper. "Never followed," he said. Secretary Yoon hesitated imperceptibly. "Sir, if I may ask, is there a specific concern?" Ji-hoon finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Secretary Yoon couldn't quite identify. It wasn't suspicion, not entirely. It was something else. Something that looked almost like curiosity. "No specific concern," Ji-hoon said. "I simply want to know who's living in my home." "Understood, sir. I'll arrange surveillance immediately." The reports began arriving within days, and each one made Ji-hoon more intrigued. Amara Johnson left the penthouse every Sunday at precisely 9 in the morning. She took the subway across the city to a modest neighborhood in the eastern part of Seoul, a working-class area far from the gleaming towers of Gangnam. She would enter a small apartment building and not emerge for several hours. "Unit 204, Secretary Yoon reported. "The lease is under the name Grace Mensah, an elderly Ghanaian woman, 76 years old." "Who is Grace Mensah to her?" "We're still investigating, but there's more." Secretary Yoon checked his notes. "She also visits a pharmacy twice a week. The purchases are unusual. Prescription medications, but the quantities and types suggest they're not for her." "What kind of medications?" "Primarily treatments associated with chronic illness, heart conditions, specifically. Also diabetes management." Ji-hoon leaned back in his chair, turning a pen over in his fingers. "Continue the surveillance. I want to know everything." The investigation deepened. Secretary Yoon's team traced connections, interviewed neighbors under the guise of various pretexts, pieced together a picture that grew more complex and more compelling with each passing day. Grace Mensah had come to Korea 20 years ago, following her daughter who had married a Korean businessman. That daughter and her husband had both died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving behind a young child, a mixed-race girl named Hana, who was now 7 years old. Amara Johnson had no blood connection to either of them, but she was supporting them both. The surveillance revealed that Amara sent nearly 70% of her income to that modest apartment. She paid for Grace's medications, for Hannah's school fees, for their rent and food and utilities. She bought her own clothes at secondhand shops, and often skipped meals to ensure that her paycheck stretched far enough. She was working herself to exhaustion for an elderly woman and a child who had no legal claim on her whatsoever, simply because they needed help, and she was there to give it. Ji-hoon read the final surveillance report in his study, the door locked, the room silent. He stared at the photograph of Amara helping Grace walk down the apartment building's stairs, at the image of her carrying Hannah on her hip, the child's arms wrapped around her neck with complete trust. In his world, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. Loyalty was bought and love was a weakness to be exploited. But this woman, this ordinary, exhausted, stubborn woman, she confused him. Why would she sacrifice so much for people who weren't even her family? Why would she work in a place that clearly frightened her without ever complaining? Why did she have such fire in her eyes when she should have been broken by life years ago? He wanted to understand her. No, he needed to understand her, because if she was truly what she appeared to be, then she was something Ji-hoon had long stopped believing existed, something genuinely good. The first time they truly spoke was 4 weeks after her arrival. Amara was in the kitchen at 5:15 in the morning, earlier than usual, preparing the traditional Korean breakfast she had perfected over weeks of careful practice. She was arranging the banchan, the small side dishes, when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and froze. Kang Ji-hoon stood in the doorway watching her. He was dressed in a dark suit, his black hair perfectly styled, his face betraying nothing, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, seemed to pierce right through her. "You're early," he said. His voice was low, smooth, carrying an edge of danger she felt more than heard. Amara bowed slightly, her heart suddenly racing. "I apologize if I disturbed you, sir. I didn't realize you were home." "I'm always home." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Ji-hoon moved into the kitchen, and Amara had to fight the instinct to step back. He noticed her tension. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything, but he said nothing about it. "You've been here 4 weeks, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she had prepared. "Most housekeepers don't last that long. I need the job, sir." "Why?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. Amara felt her heart rate increase. She had prepared for this question, had rehearsed her answers countless times. "I have debts to pay," she said carefully. "Family obligations." Ji-hoon sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "Family obligations," he repeated. "That's a very vague answer." "It's the truth, sir." "Is it?" Silence stretched between them. Amara kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in front of her. She could feel him analyzing her, dissecting her, searching for the crack in her armor. Finally, he set down his cup. "Breakfast looks good," he said, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with her racing heart and trembling hands. Hey everyone, quick reminder, if you're loving this story, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means everything. Now, let's get back to this incredible journey. After that morning, Ji-hoon began to appear more frequently. At first, it seemed coincidental. He would be in the living room when she came to dust, would pass through the kitchen while she was cooking, would emerge from his study just as she was finishing the hallway. But there was nothing coincidental about Kang Ji-hoon. He watched the way she moved through his home, efficient but not rushed, thorough but not intrusive. He noticed how she never looked at his expensive possessions with longing, never lingered over the art or the views or the luxury that surrounded her. She worked, she completed her tasks, and she retreated to her quarters like a soldier returning to barracks. And he noticed something else. The way other staff members treated her. Secretary Yoon was professional but distant, more distant than he was with the Korean staff. The occasional visitors to the penthouse sometimes looked at her with surprise, with curiosity, with expressions that suggested they wondered what a black woman was doing in such an exclusive household. She never reacted to any of it, never showed offense or frustration. She simply did her job with quiet dignity, refusing to let anyone's expectations define her worth. It reminded him of himself in a way, the endless scrutiny, the constant judgment, the need to prove yourself every single day to people who had already decided who you were. The confrontation came 6 weeks after her arrival. Ji-hoon had been reading through reports late into the night when he decided he could no longer wait. He needed to understand this woman, needed to know if she was truly what she appeared to be. He found her in the kitchen the next morning, as usual. "Sit down," he said. Sir, sit down. We need to talk. It wasn't a request. Amara set down the ladle she was holding with trembling hands and lowered herself into the chair across from him. She kept her eyes on the table, her heart pounding. Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment. How long have you been taking care of them? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you mean, sir. Grace Mensa, the child, Hana. How long? Amara's hands clenched in her lap. This was it. He knew everything. She had been so careful, but he knew. And now she would lose her job, and then she would lose them. Please, she whispered. Please don't fire me. I'll work harder. I'll do anything. I need this job. I'm not going to fire you. She looked up, shocked. Ji-hoon's face was as unreadable as ever, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before, something almost soft. 2 years, she said finally. I've been taking care of them for 2 years. Since I met Grace at a community center for expats. Her daughter and son-in-law had just died and she was alone with Hana, and she didn't speak much Korean, and she was terrified. They're not your family. They're all the family I have. The words hung in the air between them. Ji-hoon felt something shift in his chest. Something he couldn't identify and wasn't sure he wanted to. Why didn't you put it on your application? He asked. A sick elderly woman and a child would have made you a more sympathetic candidate. Amara shook her head. People don't want employees with complications. I've been turned down from jobs before because they thought I would be unreliable, that I would miss work or be distracted. She paused. And there's something else, sir. What? A black woman taking care of a mixed-race child and a Ghanaian grandmother. Some people have assumptions about my judgment, about my situation. I couldn't risk the questions. I couldn't risk being seen as less professional. Ji-hoon was silent for a moment. He understood, perhaps better than she realized. He had spent his entire life being judged, not for his skin color, but for his family name, for his father's reputation, for the darkness that surrounded everything he touched. So you lied. I omitted. There's a difference. A ghost of a smile crossed Ji-hoon's face. Is there? Amara met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. Yes, lying is saying something false. Omitting is just not saying everything true. I never lied to you, Mr. Kang. I do have debts. I do have obligations. I just didn't explain why. Ji-hoon leaned back in his chair. This woman, this foreign housekeeper, this black American who had every reason to be afraid of him, was arguing semantics with the head of one of Korea's most powerful criminal organizations. She should have been begging for forgiveness. Instead, she was defending her honor. The old woman is sick, he said. Yes, heart condition, diabetes, arthritis. The treatments are expensive. Yes, and your salary isn't enough. Amara's jaw tightened. I'm managing. Are you? She didn't answer because they both knew the truth. She wasn't managing. She was drowning. Every month was a calculation of which bills to delay, which meals to skip, which medicines were absolutely essential. She was one emergency away from losing everything. Ji-hoon stood. Come with me. Sir? Now. He walked out of the kitchen without waiting to see if she would follow. After a moment of hesitation, she did. He led her through the penthouse to the heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. The study. The forbidden room. Secretary Yoon's warnings echoed in her head as Ji-hoon pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter. Amara stepped inside and stopped. She didn't know what she had expected. Weapons, perhaps. Evidence of crimes. Something dark and terrible that matched the rumors about this man. Instead, she found a library. The walls were lined with books. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. The shelves reached the ceiling with a rolling ladder to access the highest volumes. A large desk sat near the window, neat and organized, with a single lamp and a leather chair, and on the desk, a photograph. Ji-hoon noticed where her eyes had landed. My mother, he said. She died when I was 12. Amara looked at the photo, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, her arm around a young boy who had not yet learned to hide his emotions. She was sick for a long time, Ji-hoon continued. My father refused to get her proper treatment, said it was too expensive, said she was weak. His voice was flat, controlled, but Amara could hear the ancient rage beneath the surface. I promised myself that I would never let money be the reason someone I cared about suffered. He turned to face her. I'm going to pay for Grace's treatment. Amara stared at him. What? Her surgery, her medications, everything. I'll pay for it. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I can. Because you work for me, which makes your problems my problems. Because... He stopped, something flickering across his face. Because you remind me of someone I used to be, before all of this. Amara's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept that, sir. I can't. It's too much. The surgery alone costs. I know what it costs. I don't care what it costs. He stepped closer, and for the first time his voice gentled. You've been carrying this alone for 2 years. Let someone help you. But why? You don't even know me. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I'd like to, he said quietly, if you'll let me. The surgery was scheduled for the following month. Amara tried to argue, to negotiate, to at least set up some kind of payment arrangement. Ji-hoon refused every attempt. The money, he said, was nothing to him, less than nothing. What mattered was that the old woman would live and that Amara would stop slowly killing herself with stress and exhaustion. In the weeks leading up to the surgery, everything changed. Ji-hoon began coming home earlier. He would sit in the kitchen while Amara cooked, asking questions about her life, her past, her hopes for the future. He was fascinated by her stories of growing up in Atlanta, of her parents who had worked 3 jobs between them to give her opportunities, of the grandmother who had taught her to cook and to pray and to never let anyone make her feel small. She told him about coming to Korea, about the man who had promised her a future and then discarded her when that future became inconvenient, about the terror of being stranded in a foreign country, unable to speak the language, unsure how to survive, about finding Grace and Hana, and realizing that sometimes family wasn't about blood, it was about choice. You could have gone home, Ji-hoon said one evening, back to America, started over, and left them. Amara shook her head. Grace was already attached to me by then, and Hana, that little girl, had already lost her parents. I couldn't be another person who abandoned her, even though staying meant struggling. Struggling for something you love isn't the same as suffering for nothing. One gives you purpose. The other just takes pieces of your soul. Ji-hoon absorbed her words in silence. He had never thought of it that way, had never considered that sacrifice could be a form of strength rather than weakness. In turn, he told her things he had never told anyone, about his father's brutality, about watching his mother fade away while surrounded by wealth that could have saved her, about the day he took over the syndicate, the blood on his hands that had never quite washed clean, about the nightmares that still haunted him, the faces of people he had hurt, the weight of every decision he had ever made. You're the first person who's looked at me without fear, he said one night. Everyone else sees the title, the power, the danger. You see, I see a man, Amara said simply, a complicated man who has done terrible things and carries the weight of them. A man who could have let his past destroy him but didn't. A man who saved my grandmother's life for no reason except that he could. She's not your grandmother. She's more my grandmother than any blood relative I've ever had. Blood doesn't make family, Mr. Kang. Choice does. Ji-hoon looked at her across the table, candles flickering between them, and felt his carefully constructed walls crumble a little more. I'm falling in love with you, he said. The words hung in the air. Amara's breath caught. Ji-hoon, I know I shouldn't. I know this can't end well. I know that my world is dangerous and dark, and that you deserve someone who can give you a normal life. His voice cracked slightly. But I can't stop it. I tried. I can't. Amara stood slowly and walked around the table. She knelt beside his chair and took his hands in hers, her dark skin against his pale fingers, a contrast that somehow felt like completion. I'm not asking for normal, she said. I'm not asking for safe. I'm just asking for you, whatever that means, whatever that brings. You don't know what you're saying. The syndicate, my enemies, the constant danger, and there are people who would see us together and... He trailed off. And what, judge us? Think it's strange? She shook her head. I've been judged my entire life, Ji-hoon. For my skin, for my choices, for existing in spaces where people thought I didn't belong. If I let judgment stop me from living, I would have stopped a long time ago. She reached up and touched his face, and he leaned into her palm like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. I've been surviving my whole life, she whispered. For once, I want to live, and when I'm with you, I feel alive. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she would shatter, but she pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened, and all the walls they had built around themselves came crashing down. When they finally separated, both breathless, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he said. I know. There will be people who try to use you against me. People who will see you as a weakness. People who will judge us for being together, not just because of who I am, but because of who we are together. Then we'll face them together. He laughed, a sound of pure wonder. How are you so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just too stubborn to be afraid. He kissed her again, and this time neither of them held back. The news spread through the syndicate like wildfire. The specter of Gangnam had taken a lover, not a socialite, not a power player, Not even a Korean woman. A black American housekeeper. A nobody from nowhere with no connections and no leverage. The reaction was mixed, and often ugly. Some of Ji-hoon's men thought it was weakness, proof that their leader had gone soft. They whispered in corners and exchanged meaningful glances, wondering if perhaps it was time for new leadership. A few made comments about his exotic taste that stopped just short of outright disrespect. Others were more openly hostile. They questioned his judgment, wondered aloud what a man of his position was doing with that kind of woman, suggested that perhaps his faculties were slipping if he couldn't find a suitable Korean match. Ji-hoon heard all of it. His surveillance network missed nothing, and he addressed it the way he addressed all challenges to his authority, swiftly and decisively. "There seems to be some confusion," he said at a gathering of his top lieutenants, his voice carrying the quiet menace that made grown men tremble. "Some of you appear to believe that my personal life is open for discussion. Allow me to correct that misunderstanding." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Amara Johnson is under my protection. Any disrespect toward her, spoken or implied, will be treated as disrespect toward me, and you all know how I respond to disrespect." The room was utterly silent. "Do we have an understanding?" Heads nodded quickly. Voices murmured assent, but Ji-hoon knew that words and fear only went so far. The real test would come from actions. The test came sooner than expected. It was at a formal gathering, a business event where Ji-hoon's legitimate enterprises intersected with Seoul's elite. Amara accompanied him as his partner, dressed in a stunning gown he had insisted on buying despite her protests about the cost. She was beautiful. She was always beautiful, but tonight, with her hair styled elegantly and her head held high, she was transcendent, and she was also, unmistakably, the only black woman in the room. Heads turned as they entered. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed curiosity, others showed disapproval, and a few showed something uglier, a contempt that they didn't quite bother to hide. Amara felt it all. Years of experience had taught her to read the temperature of a room, to identify the people who saw her as a novelty and those who saw her as an intrusion. But she kept her chin raised, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Ji-hoon's hand found the small of her back, steady and reassuring. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "We can leave. I'm not leaving because people don't like the way I look. This isn't about—" "It's exactly about that, and I've dealt with it my whole life." She looked up at him. "If we leave now, they'll think they've won. That I'm ashamed. That we're ashamed." She shook her head. "I'm not ashamed. Are you?" Ji-hoon looked at this woman, this impossible, courageous, stubborn woman, and felt something that might have been awe. "Never," he said. "Never for a moment." "Then let's stay. Let's show them exactly who they're dealing with." The incident that changed everything happened an hour into the event. They had been circulating through the crowd, Ji-hoon introducing Amara to various business contacts and associates. Most were polite, if sometimes stiff. A few were genuinely warm, curious about the American woman who had captured the Spectre's heart. And then they encountered Chairman Kwon. Kwon Hyuk-soo was old money, old power, old prejudice. He ran a conglomerate that had profited from Ji-hoon's protection for years, and he had the arrogance of a man who believed that money made him superior to everyone around him. "Kang Ji-hoon," Kwon said, his eyes sliding over Amara with barely concealed disdain. "I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. This is your companion?" "Amara Johnson," Ji-hoon said, his voice carefully neutral. "My partner." Kwon's smile was condescending. "How modern of you." He turned to Amara, speaking in deliberately slow Korean, as if she were a child. "You are from Africa?" "America," Amara replied in perfectly adequate Korean. She had been studying for months. "Atlanta, Georgia." Kwon's eyebrows rose slightly, but his contempt didn't waver. "Ah, still, quite a long way from home. You must find our culture very different." "Different isn't the same as inferior, Chairman Kwon. Korean culture has given me much to admire and learn from. I'm sure it has." His smile turned sharp. "Tell me, Miss Johnson, what is it exactly that attracted you to our Ji-hoon here? His position? His resources?" The implication was clear and ugly. Ji-hoon's hand tightened on Amara's back, rage building in his chest. But before he could respond, Amara spoke. "Actually, Chairman Kwon, what attracted me was his kindness, his willingness to help people who have no claim on his charity, his loyalty to those he cares about." She smiled, a gentle expression that somehow carried an edge of steel. "I understand that those qualities might be foreign to you, given your question, but I assure you they do exist, even in powerful men." Kwon's face flushed with anger. "You speak very boldly for a what, Chairman Kwon?" Amara's voice was quiet but firm. "Please finish your sentence. I'm curious to hear what word you were about to use." The crowd around them had gone silent. Everyone was watching, waiting, holding their breath. Kwon sputtered, caught between his prejudice and the very public setting. I simply meant, I know what you meant, and I understand why you would think it. A black woman with a powerful Korean man. Surely there must be some ulterior motive, some calculating agenda. She shook her head slowly. But the truth is much simpler than your assumptions, Chairman Kwon. I love him, not for his money or his power, but for the man he is when no one's watching. And he loves me, not despite who I am, but because of it. She turned to Ji-hoon, her eyes meeting his. I spent my whole life being underestimated, being assumed to be less than I am, being made to feel like I had to apologize for existing, but not with him, never with him. Ji-hoon looked at her. This woman who had just defended their relationship with more dignity and courage than most of his lieutenants showed in a lifetime, and felt something break open in his chest. Before he could stop himself, before he could think about the audience or the implications or the whispers that would follow, he pulled her close and kissed her, right there, in front of everyone. It wasn't a quick, perfunctory kiss. It was deep and real and undeniable, a declaration that no words could match. When they finally separated, the room was utterly silent. Ji-hoon turned to face the crowd, keeping Amara at his side. Let me be clear, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. This woman is not my accessory, not my charity case, not my temporary entertainment. She is my partner, my equal, and the person I intend to spend my life with. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to leave. Both this room and any association with me or my businesses. His eyes found Kwon, who was now pale with a mixture of anger and fear. Anyone, for any reason. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, a woman near the back of the room began to clap. Others joined in, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Not everyone, of course. Some faces remained stony, disapproving, but enough people were applauding that the message was clear. Amara had won. They had won. As the crowd's attention slowly shifted away, Ji-hoon led Amara to a quiet corner. She was trembling slightly, the adrenaline catching up with her. Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine. She laughed, shaky but genuine. I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe you did that. You were magnificent. I was terrified. That's what made it magnificent. He cupped her face in his hands. You showed them something they've never seen before. Someone who refuses to be diminished. Someone who demands respect, not through power, but through sheer force of character. I just wanted them to understand. They understand. Believe me. They understand now. He kissed her forehead. I have never been more proud to stand beside someone. The aftermath of that night changed everything. Within the syndicate, Amara's role transformed. She was no longer just Ji-hoon's foreign lover. She had become something else entirely, a symbol of a different kind of strength, a moral compass that pointed toward something beyond violence and power. The men who had whispered in corners fell silent. Those who had questioned Ji-hoon's judgment found themselves reconsidering, and a few, a small but growing number, began to see in Amara something worth protecting. They called her the Heart. It's ridiculous, she told Ji-hoon one evening, as they stood on the penthouse balcony watching the lights of Seoul. Is it? You've changed things, Amara. You've changed me. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind. I didn't do anything except love you. That's everything. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city pulse with life below them. I want to marry you, Ji-hoon said. Amara went very still. I know it's complicated, he continued quickly. My world isn't safe. There will always be people who want to hurt me, and by extension you. There will be people who judge us for being together, for reasons that have nothing to do with my business. I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you peace. He turned her to face him. But I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I can promise that I will protect you with everything I have. I can promise that you will never be alone again. He took her hands. Amara Johnson, will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. He kissed her, and the city sparkled below them. And for one perfect moment, the world was exactly as it should be. The wedding was held 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, intimate, nothing like the grand affairs that powerful men in Ji-hoon's position usually threw. Amara had insisted on simplicity, and Ji-hoon had agreed without hesitation. Hana was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle with exaggerated seriousness, scattering petals like she was performing brain surgery. The guests, a mix of Ji-hoon's most trusted lieutenants and Amara's small circle of friends, tried not to laugh. Grace sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. She was healthy now, stronger than she had been in years, a living testament to what Ji-hoon's intervention had accomplished. Secretary Yoon stood beside Ji-hoon as best man, a position that surprised everyone, including Yoon himself, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a grudging respect for the woman who had somehow transformed his cold employer into something approaching human. And when Amara walked down the aisle, dressed in a gown that blended Korean tradition with African-American elegance, Ji-hoon forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful. She was always beautiful. But today, with joy radiating from her face, she was transcendent. "You look," he trailed off, unable to find adequate words. "You too," she said, squeezing his hands. Like a man who finally found what he was looking for, they exchanged vows. Simple ones, honest ones, not the flowery promises of fairy tales, but real commitments that acknowledged the complications of their life together. They promised to be honest, to be patient, to support each other through whatever storms would inevitably come. And when they kissed, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Later at the reception, Grace approached Ji-hoon. "I want to say something to you," she said, her voice stern, despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. Ji-hoon straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am. That girl has been through more hardship than anyone should ever face. She lost her country, her plans, her sense of belonging, and still, she found room in her heart to take care of an old woman and a child who weren't even hers." Grace's eyes were fierce. "And then she found room for you, with all your complications and dangers and darkness. I know. Do you? Because if you ever make her cry tears of sadness, if you ever make her regret choosing you, I don't care how many soldiers you command, I will find a way to make you pay." Ji-hoon smiled, the first genuine smile he had ever offered this woman. "I believe you, and I welcome it, because if I ever hurt her, I'll deserve whatever you do to me." Grace studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You'll do just fine." She patted his cheek, a gesture that was simultaneously gentle and warning, and walked away to find more food. Years passed. Ji-hoon, under Amara's influence, began to shift the syndicate's operations. Slowly, carefully, he moved away from the most violent and destructive businesses. The drug trade was shut down. Human trafficking rings were not only abandoned, but actively dismantled. Money was funneled into legitimate enterprises: real estate, technology, entertainment. It wasn't a fairy tale transformation. The syndicate still operated outside the law in many ways. There were still moments of violence, still enemies who needed to be dealt with, still compromises that made Amara's stomach turn. But it was progress. Real, meaningful progress. Hana grew up healthy and happy, blissfully unaware of her Uncle Ji-hoon's real occupation. She thought he ran a boring investment company, which was technically true now. She excelled in school, developed a passion for art, and became a bridge between cultures, proud of both her Korean and African heritage. Grace lived to see her 90th birthday, surrounded by the family she had built from strangers and love. When she finally passed, peaceful and content, she left behind a legacy of kindness that continued to ripple outward through everyone she had touched. And Amara and Ji-hoon, against all odds, were happy. Not perfectly happy, not the uncomplicated bliss of simple lives. There were fights, disagreements, moments when the darkness of his world threatened to overwhelm the light she brought. There were nights when he woke from nightmares, and she held him until the shaking stopped. There were days when she missed her home country, and he tried to understand what it meant to be permanently between two worlds. But through it all, they had each other. One evening, many years after their first meeting, they stood on the same balcony where he had proposed. The city had changed around them, but their love remained constant. "Do you ever regret it?" Ji-hoon asked. "Staying with me?" Amara considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "Every choice I made led me here, to you, to Hana, to this life that's more than I ever dreamed possible. Even the dangerous parts, the scary parts, especially those, they made me stronger. They made us stronger." She turned to look at him, this man who had been monster and savior, stranger and soulmate. "You asked me once why I wasn't afraid of you. Do you remember what I said? You said you saw a man, a complicated man. I still see him. Every day I see him, and every day I love him more." Ji-hoon pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never believed in redemption," he murmured. "Never believed someone like me could deserve happiness. And now I believe in you. That's enough." They stood together as the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The city hummed with life below them, millions of stories unfolding in the gathering darkness. But their story was the one that mattered, a story of finding light in the darkest places, of love that defied expectation and prejudice and every rule they had been taught, of two broken people who somehow made each other whole. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And they lived, not happily ever after, but happily enough, with all the complications and challenges and moments of doubt that real love requires. which in the end is the best any of us can hope for. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means everything to this channel. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.